You've arrived at Cozy Side Audio, where dreams begin with a story. Tonight's tale is here to help you wind down and find peace. If this brings you comfort, please like, share, and subscribe so more dreamers can join us. Let the night carry you, and let's begin.
CozySideAudio presents The White Room, Blood in the Sand. Chapter 1, The Trailhead. The road had vanished hours ago. Not in the dramatic, end-of-the-world kind of way. It simply faded. Paved gave way to gravel, gravel to dust, and dust to something finer, ancient and dry and pale, like it had waited thousands of years to be stepped on again. Even the GPS had given up, its blue arrow stalling, then spinning, then disappearing entirely from the blank terrain as if unsure whether it belonged here at all. Rachel Halden didn't mind. Owen's hand rested casually on her thigh, fingers tapping to a beat only he heard. The windows were down. The air was hot. Not sun-warm, not summer-warm, dry, like paper. It crackled across her face as they drove, the last shreds of coolness long gone. Everything around them pulsed in quiet beige and gold, towering rock faces on the horizon, chalky trail signs, the occasional stubborn cactus that clung to the land like a memory. "This is the part where you tell me you're not completely lost," she said. "I'm not completely lost," Owen replied, grinning. She glanced sideways at him. His curls were already damp at the temples, even under the baseball cap. That smile, crooked, boyish, shouldn't have still worked after all these years. And yet, here she was, still laughing inside whenever he used it, still letting him get away with just enough. "And when we don't make it back," she added, "you'll tell the vultures it was a scenic route?" "I'll tell them you had a good sense of humor." Rachel snorted. "Liar." They bounced in their seats as the SUV lurched over a rock. The shock rattled through her spine. Owen braced the wheel, muttered something about suspension, and kept going. There was a note of freedom in his recklessness, a subtle high that came when the world finally quieted around him. It was one of the things she'd first fallen for. He didn't move through life so much as lean into it, like he trusted the ground to rise and catch him. Always had. They passed the last marker for the trailhead around midday, a half-buried wooden sign, crooked, half swallowed by sand. Painted letters peeled away in strips like sunburned skin. Solstice Narrows. Below it, in small red text, dangerous conditions possible. No service. Proceed with caution. Rachel leaned forward, resting her elbow on the window frame. The canyon walls ahead yawned open, shadowed veins of stone twisting and folding inward. From this angle, it didn't look dangerous, it looked still, as if the land was mid-breath, waiting. Owen pulled the car up beside a low rock outcrop that offered the barest excuse for shade. He killed the engine. "Home sweet nowhere," he said. She opened her door and stepped out. Her boots hit gravel. The silence struck her first. Not the absence of sound, exactly, but the presence of something else. Wind moved across the desert like a whisper under skin. A sound that didn't break silence, but sharpened it. Rachel stretched her arms overhead, spine crackling like old branches. Her camera bag thumped gently against her hip. It had been a long drive from Bryce. Longer still because they'd stopped for photos every hour, sunrise over the red cliffs, lizards sunbathing on guardrails, the curve of sandstone that reminded her of a ribcage. She'd already burned through half her memory card, but that wasn't unusual. She had a tendency to shoot everything on instinct before she could think too hard. Thinking ruined it. Owen pulled the backpacks from the trunk, one light, one heavy, and slung the heavier one over his shoulder. "You good?" he asked. "Always," she said. It was half true. That was how most truths lived between them. They started walking. The trail was thin, winding through sagebrush and bleached roots. A sharp incline at first, then flat, then down again, tracing a series of ancient washes that looked like dried veins carved into the rock. Rachel let Owen lead. He had a better sense of direction, and besides, she liked watching him move in terrain like this. His steps were confident, not cocky. There was something grounding in it. She felt safer just being behind him. They didn't talk much at first. The heat made words stick to the tongue. Dust kicked up with every step, clinging to their boots, their skin, their sweat-slicked arms. The deeper they went, the taller the canyon walls grew, arching overhead like cathedral stonework. Light filtered down in shafts, bending over rock ledges and breaking into warm, golden halos. It was beautiful. It was too beautiful to be real. Rachel lifted her camera, adjusted the lens, and snapped a shot of Owen ahead of her, silhouetted against the narrow turn of the trail. The shadows framed him perfectly. She looked at the preview screen, smiled, then shut it off. Some images were better when you didn't look too hard. They hiked for another hour before stopping for water. Owen handed her a bottle, already warm. "Romantic," she said. "It's a vintage," he replied, deadpan. "Desert Spring, filtered through hubris and regret." She laughed, wiped her forehead, and sat against a rock shaped like a shoulder blade. The air shimmered around them. The silence wasn't silent anymore, it buzzed. Not insects. Not animals. Just heat, humming between their ears. "This was a good idea," she said softly. Owen turned his head toward her. "Yeah, I mean it. You're not just saying that because we're engaged and you're legally obligated to be nice?" "I'm not legally obligated," she said. "I'm morally obligated." "That sounds worse." They smiled at each other. A moment passed. The heat pulled at their skin like invisible threads. She felt the camera strap tighten slightly as she shifted. There was a brief breeze, hot, barely felt, but it stirred the dust near her feet. The smell of sandstone thickened. Time, in places like this, began to fold. Rachel looked down the trail. "Let's keep going," she said. The trail narrowed. They passed under an overhang where the rock turned almost white, sun-bleached and ghostly. Owen touched it as they walked, dragging his fingers along its cool, smooth face. They stopped to photograph a narrow slot, a crack no wider than a man's shoulders, descending into shadow. It wasn't on any map. It didn't need to be. They were far enough now that the air felt different. Not cooler, just closer. The canyon began to press in. Not menacingly. More like a whisper leaning closer to your ear. Rachel felt it. That tension. The awareness that you had walked into a place older than names. She adjusted her backpack, lifted her camera again, and caught a shot of the canyon's interior. The walls flared out and in again, curving like muscle. Light above. Darkness ahead. She looked back at Owen. "Want to keep going?" He nodded. "Just a little deeper." They slipped inside. Chapter 2: Dust and Bloodlines. The further they went, the quieter the world became. The sounds that had followed them this far, gravel under boots, water sloshing in a half-empty bottle, the crinkle of nylon bags, began to fall away. Replaced not by silence, but something denser. The kind of quiet you could drown in if you weren't careful. Rachel ran her hand along the wall as they passed through a particularly narrow turn. The stone was warm, almost unnervingly smooth in some places, like water had licked it clean over centuries. The path wound like a spinal cord, tight, flexed, breathing stone. They had to turn their shoulders sideways in certain sections. She felt the camera press into her chest, the lens cap bumping her collarbone. It was difficult to say when the canyon had begun to change shape, but it had. The soft red and gold tones of the upper cliffs had faded into chalky white, tinged with streaks of ochre. Like veins under translucent skin. These were the Narrows, though no one had said that word out loud since they'd entered. It felt too final. Too much like naming something that wasn't theirs to name. Owen ducked under an arch of twisted sandstone, loose dust falling from the ceiling. He reached back without looking, offering her a hand over a sloped drop. She took it without hesitation. His fingers were rough with calluses, warm and familiar. His grip tightened slightly, not out of necessity, but out of habit. She held on a moment longer than she needed to. They came out into a chamber. Not vast, but open enough to feel like a room. The walls stretched up in smooth vertical lines, almost sheer, with only the thinnest sliver of sky visible at the top. The light poured down like it had been poured from a crack in the ceiling of the world, brilliant, white and soft-edged. It diffused over the ground like mist, turning dust into something sacred. Rachel caught her breath. She didn't speak. She lifted her camera. Click. Owen looked around, whistling softly. This place is unreal. It doesn't feel real, she said. Like we're inside a painting. Like we're inside a body, she said, without thinking. He turned. A body? She hesitated. Yeah, you don't feel it? Like we're walking through something that used to be alive. He stepped closer to the canyon wall, pressing his palm flat against it. Still is, maybe. Rachel watched him. The curve of his back, the sweat-damp fabric of his shirt clinging to his shoulder blades, the soft movement of his chest rising and falling. There was something strange about it, watching someone you loved in a place that didn't feel quite part of the living world. She didn't say that out loud. Instead, she circled the chamber slowly, taking photographs. Angles. Shadows. The way the light bent in midair. She paused beside a jagged rock formation at the base of the wall and ran a finger through the dust there. It was fine as ash. Dry, weightless. She lifted it and let it fall through her fingers. It clung to her skin in thin gray lines, like old scars. Did I ever tell you about the time my mom got stuck in a cave? She said, still watching the dust. Owen looked up from where he'd crouched to adjust his bootlaces. You have not told me about that. She wasn't stuck for long. Just enough to freak out. She was in college, some spelunking thing. Said she got wedged between two walls so tight she couldn't turn her head. Had to go backwards the whole way out. That's horrible. She never went into a cave again, Rachel said, smiling faintly. She wouldn't even watch movies where people go underground. She said the silence in rock isn't real silence. It's just pressure, waiting to speak. Owen gave a mock shiver. That's legitimately creepy. I love it. Rachel looked up toward the slit of sky. A bird drifted across the opening. Just one. Gone in seconds. The light shifted slightly, a whisper of motion across the ground. She'd hate it here, she said. Owen stood and walked over. But you don't. Rachel paused. No, I don't. He touched the inside of her elbow. A light graze, but enough to turn her. He was looking at her in that way he had sometimes, when he didn't need to say anything, when the affection was quiet, ambient, not a performance. She leaned into it. They kissed. Not long. Just long enough for the heat of the stone to soak into their skin. Later, they moved on. The canyon grew tighter. Not dangerously so, not yet, but enough to change their movements. The sunlight had shifted from overhead to a steep angle, cutting through the upper crevice and painting the walls in stripes. Rachel kept her camera at the ready. The silence around them had texture now. She imagined it as cloth thick, hot, clinging. They came to a fork in the passage. The left path curved upward, narrow and sunlit. The right descended into a smooth, dark corridor. Owen checked the GPS again out of habit, knowing it wouldn't help. We follow the drainage path, right? He asked. She nodded. Right. That's where the slot keeps going. As they took the right-hand path, the air cooled slightly. Not cold, just less suffocating. The ground underfoot shifted from packed dust to smoother rock, eroded by long-past water. There were pale mineral stains along the walls, like the fingers of a ghost dragging downward. Rachel stopped to take a photo. When the shutter clicked, it echoed faintly, then vanished. She was lowering the camera when Owen yelped. Shit. She turned fast, heart hammering. He was hopping on one foot, holding the other in both hands. What happened? She asked, rushing over. Rock, he grunted. Sharp one. I wasn't watching, stepped full on. Let me see. He sat against the wall, grimacing. Pulled off his boot. Blood welled from the ball of his foot, seeping between his toes. A thin, deep slice. Rachel pulled a cloth from her bag, wrapped it tight, then slid a bandage over it from their first aid kit. She worked in silence. You okay? She asked after a long pause. Yeah, he said, though his jaw was tight. Just pissed. Should have seen it. Rachel met his eyes. You didn't. He nodded, reluctantly accepting the truth. I can walk, he added. I know. He pulled his boot back on, winced, then stood slowly. They kept moving. By late afternoon, the canyon narrowed again, so tightly now that they had to go single file. Rachel went first this time, navigating by instinct more than sight. The air was heavier. The sky above looked thinner, as if the world was pressing in from every side. They passed a section where the walls glowed pale amber. Rachel touched it. Warm, polished smooth by water or wind or time. "Do you think we'll ever stop doing this?" she asked. "Doing what?" "Going off into the middle of nowhere together." Owen was quiet a moment. "Only if you ask me to." She turned to look at him. He added, "But I hope not. I like the quiet with you." She didn't answer, just kept walking. They camped that night on a flat shelf of stone beside a dry pool bed. The stars arrived in pieces, then all at once. No clouds. No wind. Just heat radiating upward from the canyon floor like memory. They ate cold food. Shared water. Curled into sleeping bags with their backs against the stone. The canyon held its silence. Rachel lay awake longer than she meant to, watching the narrow stretch of stars above. "Ratch," Owen murmured. "Yeah, this was a good day." She thought about the blood on his foot, the suffocating heat, the sliver of sky overhead that didn't seem to move. "It was," she said. She meant it. She also meant, "Please let it stay this way." Chapter 3. The Soundlessness Below. By morning, the world had folded itself around them like a closing hand. The stars were gone. Clouds smothered the light with the same quiet dominance as a blanket drawn over a face. Not thunderheads. Not storm clouds. Just an unbroken sheet of pale gray, glowing faintly in the early light, too high and featureless to read. Rachel stirred inside her sleeping bag, heat already clinging to her arms like wet cloth. The stone beneath her back hadn't cooled overnight. It never did out here. It just soaked in the day's temperature and held it close, exhaling heat like breath. Owen was still asleep beside her. One arm slung over his eyes, the other curled near his chest. His foot bandaged and stiff, twitched once in his sleep, then stilled. Rachel sat up slowly, wiped the sweat from her neck, and reached for the camera beside her bag. Her fingers found the grip by instinct. She turned it on and let the weight settle against her palm. The world looked different through the lens. Not softer, but slower. The edges of things came into focus, details sharpened, a split in the rock like a vein, a feather caught between two stones, the warped shimmer of heat rising from the canyon floor. The camera was less a tool and more a way of paying attention. Without it, she sometimes felt like her senses blurred, like her memories wouldn't anchor unless they were framed first. She aimed toward the sky, clicked, checked the preview. The shot was flat, just a smear of lightless gray above pale rock. She deleted it without thinking. A sound behind her, the rasp of nylon, the sigh of a sleeping bag pulled down. "Already up?" Owen mumbled. Rachel turned. "Didn't sleep much. You okay?" She nodded, but it wasn't a yes. "The air feels weird." Owen sat up, rubbing his face. His curls stuck out in odd directions. He reached for the water bottle beside his pack and took a long drink. "It's the pressure," he said. "Weather's shifting. Not enough to rain, though." "Maybe." "You worried?" She shrugged. "I don't know. Doesn't feel right." "Want to turn back?" Rachel hesitated. They were deep enough now that going back would take longer than pushing through. But she didn't say that out loud. The discomfort wasn't rational. It was in her spine, in her teeth, in the weight of the silence between the canyon walls. Like something was holding its breath. She looked toward the trail ahead, narrow, winding, the canyon walls arching upward like a throat. "No," she said. "Let's keep going." They packed in silence. Owen winced slightly as he laced his boot over the bandaged foot, but didn't complain. They ate a dry breakfast, protein bars, dried fruit, barely enough to coat their stomachs. Water was low, but manageable. They'd rationed well. They'd planned this trip smart. They'd done everything right. Rachel stuffed her sleeping bag into the compression sack and double-checked her camera gear. Batteries full. Memory card 3/4 full. She left it that way. She liked knowing she had room left. As if that space might come in handy for something unplanned. Owen slung his pack onto his back and stretched. "Let's find that last slot, yeah. That's the one with the photo I wanted. Lead the way." The slot canyon twisted tighter. The rock here was lighter, bone-white, and tinged with powdery red, like blood diluted in water. The walls narrowed until they brushed their shoulders. Rachel tucked her arms close to her ribs. Owen ducked slightly in places where the ceiling sloped. The heat had become heavier than before, though the sun itself was nowhere to be seen. They passed a dry waterfall, just a smooth drop in the rock where water had once carved a path. Its edges were soft. Rachel trailed her fingers over the lip as she stepped down. Dust puffed into the air, catching the light in ghostly streaks. "Do you think people ever lived here?" she asked. "In the canyon?" "In these canyons. Long ago. Before roads. Before names." Owen paused. "Maybe. Would have taken guts. Or no choice." He glanced back at her. "That sounds like something your mom would have said." Rachel smiled faintly. She probably did. They kept walking. The air thinned. Not in oxygen, but in something else. The kind of air that made your ears strain, like you were underwater. Rachel felt it more with every step, the absence of sound. Not quiet. Absence. No birds. No wind. Not even the scrape of her own boots felt real. The canyon swallowed everything. They reached a section so narrow that Owen had to remove his pack and hold it over his head to fit. Rachel followed, inching sideways, her camera pressed tight to her chest. The stone touched both shoulders at once. It was cold despite the heat. They emerged into another chamber. Smaller than the last. Oval-shaped, maybe 15 feet across. The floor was uneven, sloped, with loose sand collecting at the lowest point. The walls curved inward, smooth and bone-pale, flecked with mineral streaks like faded bruises. Owen exhaled. "There it is." Rachel turned toward him. "That angle up there." He pointed. "See where the light hits that ledge?" She followed his gaze. The canyon wall jutted out slightly, forming a natural step. A narrow crevice cut upward from there, no more than 2 feet wide. "That's the one," he said. "We photographed from there, looking down." Rachel looked uncertain. "It's steep." "I'll go first." He climbed easily at first, finding handholds in the natural ridges. The rock gave beneath him slightly in one spot, and a few pebbles scattered downward. He laughed it off, muttering something about gravity and trust issues. Rachel watched him closely. He reached the ledge, pulled himself up, and crouched. "Come on up." She shook her head. "I'll shoot from here. I've got a longer lens." Owen frowned. "I want one with both of us." "Then set the timer." He laughed. Bossy. Efficient. He adjusted the camera settings and set it on the rock, wedging it carefully. The angle was tight. He moved back to the edge of the ledge, just enough to be framed in the shot. The shutter clicked. Then everything shifted. It started with a sound. Not a crack. Not a boom. A groan. Low, distant. Like the earth rolling over in its sleep. Then a vibration beneath her boots, subtle, but unmistakable. Rachel looked up, eyes locking with Owen's. "What was that?" she asked. Owen didn't answer. The second vibration was stronger. The wall behind him shuddered, and a thin line of dust spilled from the crevice above. His expression changed, not panic, not yet. Just a flicker of confusion. Rachel stepped backward instinctively. A rock somewhere nearby, unseen, shifted. The canyon echoed with the sound. Small stones fell. The ledge beneath Owen cracked with a dry snap. Then it gave. Owen's body dropped sideways. His left leg folded under him as the rock beneath him collapsed. He slid down, hit the canyon floor with a muffled thud, and didn't move. Rachel ran. The world narrowed to breath and motion. She reached him in seconds. Owen was on his side, half buried in sand and shattered stone. His face was tight with pain, eyes squeezed shut. "Owen, hey, talk to me." He groaned. "Are you hurt?" "Where are you hurt?" "My leg," he gasped. "It's stuck, Rachel. Don't pull." She dropped to her knees beside him. One look told her enough. A slab of rock, no bigger than a cooler, but dense, jagged, had landed across his shin. His knee was twisted unnaturally. Blood soaked through the fabric. Rachel's heart pounded. She touched his shoulder gently. "Don't move." I'm going to get it off. Wait, he hissed. Don't, might make it worse. She hesitated, hands hovering. The rock wasn't something she could just lift. It was wedged into the slope, part of a collapsed chunk that had broken off from above. Any movement could shift more. Rachel's mouth went dry. Owen's eyes opened, glazed. I'm okay, he whispered through gritted teeth. Just stuck. She looked up. The crevice above loomed black and silent. Nothing moved now. The dust had settled. The canyon was quiet again. But not the same. Chapter 4. The roar that shouldn't be there. Rachel had never known stone could make a sound like that. Not a crash, not a landslide, no chaos or violence, just the deep-bellied groan of pressure giving way. A warning that hadn't sounded like a warning until it was already over. And now Owen was trapped. Pinned beneath a slab of ancient canyon wall, his leg crushed, body twisted in the worst possible way. Not broken like a splinter, but folded, compressed. As if the weight above him was no longer just a physical force, but something else entirely. The desert pressing inward. A godless kind of gravity. He was trying not to scream. That's what struck her most. He was biting down on the inside of his cheek, breathing through his nose in short, furious bursts. His eyes were open, darting, focusing hard on the ground beside him like he could somehow will himself out of it. Blood had begun to soak the lower leg of his pants. It pooled where his shin vanished beneath the rock and seeped into the sand in slow, deliberate threads. Rachel knelt beside him, heart pounding. Don't move, she whispered. Don't move. I'm not, Owen managed through gritted teeth. Can't. She looked at the slab. It had fallen at an angle, one side half buried in soft sediment, the other lodged against the canyon wall. It was almost rectangular, maybe 3 feet long, 2 feet wide, and God knew how heavy. A product of erosion and time, compacted layer by layer until it was dense enough to shatter bone like driftwood. She touched it. It didn't budge. I can dig around it, she said, voice too fast. If I get under the edge, I can wedge something in and shift it just enough. Owen shook his head. Rach, no, listen, if you move it wrong it'll just pin me worse or crush the whole thing down. I'm not going to leave you like this, she snapped. He closed his eyes, jaw tight. I know. The canyon held its silence, thicker now. Like even the air didn't want to interfere. Rachel stood and turned in a circle, scanning for anything that could help. A fallen branch. A loose stone thick enough to wedge. Nothing. Nothing but smooth canyon wall and dust. And then, a sound. Low, distant, muted. Not from Owen. Not from the stone. But from somewhere further down the canyon. A hum? She froze, tilted her head, held her breath. Then she heard it again. It wasn't humming. It was rumbling. Low and far and wrong. Not mechanical. Not natural. It didn't belong here. And then she realized what it was. Oh my God. Owen looked up at her. What? He whispered. She backed away from the slab, scrambling to the edge of the chamber, peering back through the narrow passage they'd just come from. The sound was growing, amplifying, shaking the air. Water. Not just a trickle. Not a stream. Not the soft seep of canyon runoff. A roar. There wasn't time to think. Rachel dropped beside Owen, hands flying to the buckles of his backpack. Take it off, she barked. Now. What, why? Flash flood, she said. It's coming. His face went pale. She ripped the pack off his shoulders, shoved it aside, then grabbed her own bag and the camera. Everything else was useless now. There was no elevation to climb to, no ledges above, no shelves. The only protection was the wall itself. A deep groove ran along one side of the chamber. Maybe 3 feet across, a little over 2 feet deep. Not wide enough to hide in, but maybe enough to brace against the worst of the water. She threw her body against the slab again, trying to move it just enough to pull him free. Nothing. Owen, she gasped. I can't move it. I know, he said, strangely calm now. I know. She knelt beside him. The sound was getting louder, filling the canyon, vibrating in her ribs. Rachel clutched his face. I'm not going to let it take you. He smiled. Not because it was funny, just because there was nothing else left to do. Then lie down, he said softly. What? Lie down, here, beside me, brace against me and the wall, just hang on. She didn't argue. She curled beside him in the groove, pressing her back against the canyon wall and tucking herself between his body and the stone. Her arms locked around his shoulders. His hand found her wrist and gripped tight. The roar filled everything. It wasn't just a sound anymore. It was presence. The canyon screamed with it. And then it hit. The flood was not a wall. It wasn't neat or cinematic. It came in surges. Choking, blind, grinding. Rachel's breath vanished. The water struck like a fist, slamming into her back and lifting her torso off the ground. She felt Owen's grip tighten and screamed, but the scream was torn from her throat before it even left her mouth. The current dragged. Pulled. But the rock slab above Owen held fast, creating just enough of an obstruction to create a pocket behind it, a low-pressure zone where the water surged but didn't obliterate. They were inside that pocket. Held there. Not safe. Just not gone. The sound was impossible. Dull and deafening at once. Water tore past them in sheets, ripping sand and debris loose in its wake. Branches. Stones. Bone, maybe. The world became silt and darkness. Rachel's mouth filled with water. She coughed. Choked. Slammed her head against Owen's chest and held on tighter. Minutes passed. Or seconds. Or hours. There was no time in water like this. Only the absence of air. And then, stillness. Not silence, but a stillness that made her lungs seize. The current had shifted. Less force. She coughed again this time. Just a little. Her chest spasmed. Owen's hand was still on her wrist. She opened her eyes. Water ran down the canyon wall in thick streaks. Not clear. Red with dust. Everything stank of iron and silt and earth. Owen gasped. A dry, ragged noise. You're okay, she choked out. You're okay. He didn't answer. But he was alive. The flood had passed in under 5 minutes. The chamber looked different now. Not ruined, but changed. Wet. Carved. Scoured clean. Rachel peeled herself off the wall and stood shakily. Her legs didn't work right at first. Her boots were waterlogged. Her fingers shook so badly she could barely unzip the outer pouch of her bag to check the camera. Miraculously, it had survived. Wrapped in a thick padded sleeve, it had somehow avoided being smashed or soaked. She didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Owen was breathing. Still pale, still bleeding, but his head rested back now, eyes fluttering. Conscious. She knelt beside him, pressed her forehead to his, and just breathed. They had survived. The flood had not taken him. But the canyon had. Chapter 5, Bones and Barriers. The silence didn't come all at once. It trickled in. First in the hush after the rocks stopped falling, then in the stillness of their breath, Rachel's ragged, Owen's shallow, and finally, in the realization that nothing else was coming. No rescue. No voice calling down from the rim. Just the echo of blood in her ears and the soft click of stone settling. Rachel sat curled against the canyon wall, one leg twisted awkwardly beneath her, staring at the slab pinning Owen's leg. It was a rough-cut sheet of sandstone, still wet from the flood, one edge splintered like broken pottery. His leg had vanished beneath it from the knee down. All she could see was a boot heel and a smear of dark water. He hadn't screamed since the first impact. Now he just lay there, jaw clenched, one arm thrown across his eyes like a man too tired to care anymore. Rachel's throat was raw. Her fingers ached from trying to dig, push, do something, but the slab hadn't budged. She pushed herself forward again, feeling the tremble in her arms as she dropped to her knees beside him. "Owen," she whispered. "Hey, you with me?" He nodded, barely. She moved the emergency blanket from where it had slipped and wrapped it more tightly around his torso. The tinny foil crinkled against his shirt. His lips were pale. "Pain?" she asked. His response was a rasp. "Yeah. How bad?" He opened his eyes and looked at her, and it was that look, not the words, that made her blood go cold. "Hurts like it's still breaking," he said. Rachel sat back hard against the wall, drew in a breath through her teeth, and looked around the chamber again as if the canyon might have changed while she wasn't looking. But it hadn't. The chamber they'd fallen into was an oblong bowl of pale sandstone, tapered at one end, wide enough at the other to hold both their packs, a waterlogged branch, and half the sky. The slab that had crushed Owen's leg had peeled off from the ceiling during the flood and landed like a door slammed by a god. She'd tried to dig under it, tried to shift the smaller rocks beside it. Nothing gave. The thing had to weigh hundreds of pounds, maybe more, and even if she'd had leverage, which she didn't, there was no way to get it off without destroying what was left of his leg. And still, she couldn't leave. Not yet. Not when it had barely been 2 hours. She checked their supplies next. The food was soaked, but salvageable: 2 protein bars, a few almonds, a smashed energy chew, and a packet of peanut butter that had somehow escaped intact. They had a water filter bottle, Rachel's, and Owen's small backup canister. She counted liters, then calories, then quietly folded everything back into a dry sack and placed it on a ledge out of reach of the mud. Owen was drifting. "Talk to me," she said. "Don't go to sleep yet." "Wasn't." "Liar." "Just thinking." "About?" He opened one eye. "How pissed your mom's gonna be if we don't make it back by Sunday." Rachel let out a broken sound that was half a laugh, half a sob. "We're not dying in here," she said. "I mean," he murmured, "maybe I am." "No." "Ratch." "No." She leaned in closer. "You don't say that. Not even as a joke." "Got it." He nodded again, faintly. She stayed there beside him as the light began to change. Shadows crawled higher up the walls. The last hints of floodwater seeped slowly out of the chamber floor and into the hidden cracks beneath their feet. Rachel closed her eyes, just for a second, and listened. Wind. Stone. The beat of 2 mismatched hearts. Hours passed. She measured them by the way the light moved across the canyon wall and by the intervals of Owen's breathing. He drifted in and out, sometimes conscious, sometimes not, but he never fully slept. The pain was too sharp for that. Once, in the deeper part of dusk, he asked for water. She gave it to him. Measured. Not much. Just enough to wet his lips and take the edge off. And then, slowly, as the dark settled in full, she laid her sleeping pad beside him and curled up against his uninjured side, wrapping both of them in the emergency blanket as best she could. He shivered, even in her arms. The canyon breathed cold now, exhaling what warmth the sun had left behind. Rachel held on to him like an anchor, her cheek against his shoulder, counting his breaths like they were the only numbers that mattered. Somewhere in the back of her skull, the panic still simmered, but for now it stayed quiet. She woke in the middle of the night to a sound she didn't recognize. Not an animal, not a voice. Just pressure. She sat upright. The wind had changed. It moaned low through the cracks in the stone, stirring fine dust into her mouth and eyes. Rachel blinked against it and checked Owen again. His skin was cold to the touch. Clammy. His face had taken on that pale gray tone she recognized from first aid training. Shock. She unzipped her jacket and pulled him closer, pressing her body heat into him. "Still with me," she whispered. His eyes fluttered. "Yeah. Okay." She wrapped her arms around him and listened to the wind clawing through the canyon, and this time, she didn't sleep again. Chapter 6. No Light, No Ladder. Rachel had always believed that silence came in shades. There was the sleepy hush of snowfall back home in Vermont, the warm, familiar silence of a tent on a cold night, the reverent quiet of museums and mountaintops. Even the hush of shared grief had its own texture. But the silence of this canyon, this chamber of pale stone and trapped breath, was empty. Not peaceful. Not meaningful. Just a hollow echo pressing in on all sides, so absolute that Rachel began to think she could hear her own blood move. The morning came in gradually. First as a faint silver tone, barely lightening the deepest shadows in the chamber, then slowly warming into gold as the sun inched over the rim of the canyon and poured down the angled walls. The floodwater had long since drained, leaving behind a floor of silt-streaked rock and a patchy smell of algae and stone. Rachel was already awake when the light reached her. She hadn't slept, not really. Every time her body began to relax, Owen would shift or gasp or mumble something in pain, and she'd jolt upright again, heart hammering. Now she sat cross-legged a few feet from him, trying to dry her damp socks over a flat stone, not because she believed it would work, but because it gave her hands something to do. Owen was still conscious, but barely. His eyes stayed half-lidded. His voice, when it came, was a thin rasp. "Morning?" he asked. Rachel looked at the sunlit wall. "Yeah." He swallowed. "Feel like I've been here a week. Just one night." Her voice cracked on the word just. He blinked slowly. Could have fooled me. She had done a full check of his leg earlier. The swelling had increased. His boot had to be cut halfway down to relieve pressure, but there was no way to actually remove it, too risky. His foot, what she could see of it, was purple and cold. She couldn't tell how much was swelling and how much was blood loss or damage to the nerves. There was no angle she could shift the slab. Even if she'd been strong enough, the room was too tight. She hated how close she had to be just to examine him. There was no space to sit comfortably, no room to stretch out. The canyon's curved walls bent inward just enough to turn every movement into a negotiation. She had to crawl. He couldn't even do that. She offered him a sip of water from the bottle. He took it with trembling hands, dribbled a little down his chin, and handed it back. His fingers were cold. "We need sun in here," he murmured. Rachel glanced at the narrow strip of sky overhead. Only a small triangle of sunlight managed to reach their chamber during the morning hours. By midday, it would be gone. "I'll try to set something up," she said. She climbed the opposite side of the room, carefully, and wedged herself into a corner near the light, using a boulder as a makeshift seat. From there, she had a partial view of the chamber and the exit route they'd come through. The high slot narrowed into a twisted corridor just beyond the chamber mouth. It looked so far now, like a memory from someone else's hike. She pulled out her notebook and flipped past the smeared pages. The original trail sketch was still there, now hopelessly outdated, since the flood had wiped away any clear markers. She added a line representing their current location and scribbled a list beneath it. Owen, still conscious. Leg, worsening. Water, 1.5 L total. Food, 2 bars, peanut butter, trail mix, wet. Light, 3 hours direct sun. She paused, then added, escape, no clear plan. The day dragged. She forced Owen to eat half a bar in the late morning, chewing painfully slow, trying not to gag. "You know this tastes like wet chalk, right?" he muttered. Rachel smirked. "That's how you know it's health food." He gave her a shadow of a smile and tried to lean back, but winced. "Hey," she said softly. "Don't push it. I'm just stiff. You're wrecked." He didn't argue. Later, she caught him drifting again, eyes rolling back faintly in their sockets. She called his name. No response. Her heart stuttered. "Owen." She crawled to him, touched his shoulder. "Owen." His eyes snapped open. "I'm here," he breathed. "I'm here. Just resting." "No. You don't sleep without telling me. You don't." Her voice broke halfway through. He blinked slowly. "Okay." She stayed kneeling beside him for 10 minutes, just watching him breathe. That afternoon, the heat came back. Without water on the ground, the chamber became an oven, sun reflecting off the white rock, bouncing heat between the walls. Rachel tried hanging the emergency blanket near the opening like a reflector, hoping to redirect light down toward Owen. It didn't work. Everything she tried felt pointless. Even checking the radio again, which was still soaked from the flood and clicking softly with useless static. She shook it, dried the battery, cursed at it, and then flung it into the shadows like it had betrayed her. It hit the wall and cracked. She retrieved it anyway, fingers shaking. When she returned to Owen, he had passed out. Panic rose like acid. Rachel knelt beside him and tapped his cheek. "Hey." "No." Come on. Hey. His eyelids fluttered. Still here, he whispered. She grabbed his hand, pressed it between hers, and squeezed. I can't do this without you, Owen. Not leaving. I mean it. He swallowed. I know. Then, don't cry. Please. Rachel hadn't realized she was. Her face was hot, damp. Her vision blurred. I'm scared, she said. Me too. But I'm not leaving. His mouth twisted in a tired smile. Stubborn. You love it. I really do. That night, the cold came faster. The wind returned, not fierce, but persistent, and brought a chill that sank into their bones before the sun even fully disappeared. Rachel curled against him again, this time with both of their sleeping pads underneath and their damp clothing hanging from a thin cord she'd tied across the chamber's narrowest point. She didn't sleep. Instead, she lay there, her body wrapped around his, listening to his breathing, waiting for it to pause. Terrified that it might, she made a plan. In the dark, in her head, she rehearsed it again and again. She'd wait one more day, one more night. If his fever didn't spike, if his breathing didn't get worse, if the swelling didn't creep past the knee, then she'd go. She'd leave him here, alone, in this silent, bright white coffin of stone. And she'd climb out of the canyon. Find help. Bring it back. But she didn't tell him. Not yet. She needed one more morning. Chapter 7. Teeth in the Walls. The canyon was waking up with a kind of hush that made Rachel think of churches, not the singing kind, the stone kind. The kind that smelled like dust and books and the ache of people trying not to cry. She was sitting on her heels, watching a single beam of sunlight filter in through the gap high above, slowly crawling down the curved wall like a finger tracing the spine of a giant. She wasn't sure what time it was, maybe mid-morning, maybe later. The cold had bled from her bones, replaced now by a slow, grinding tension that pressed into every inch of her skin. Owen hadn't spoken in over an hour. She kept checking his leg, even though the results were always the same. Cold, swollen, no visible bleeding, but no feeling either, not in the toes, not in the sole. When she touched them gently, earlier that morning, he hadn't even flinched. That scared her more than the color. It meant things were shutting down. Dying. There was no way to tell if it was just nerve damage or if infection was blooming under the skin, but the signs weren't good. He had a mild fever now. His pulse was fast. He said he was fine, but his sentences had gotten shorter, and when he drifted off, he stayed under longer. She rationed his water, but the more she held back, the more guilt she tasted in her mouth. What if he needed more? What if she was dooming him by trying to save him? Tell me a story, he murmured suddenly, startling her. Rachel sat upright. What? A story. Your voice helps. She scooted closer, brushing hair from his forehead. Okay. She tried to think. Her brain was a slurry of exhaustion and dirt. Okay, she said. Remember that motel in Arizona, the one with the roof shaped like a teepee? Owen cracked a smile. With the lizard in the sink? Yeah, that one. I named him Greg. You did, she laughed softly. You were heartbroken when we had to leave. I left him a peanut. He didn't want it. Lizards don't eat peanuts, Owen. He was a smart lizard. You don't know his life. She shook her head and leaned her forehead gently against his. I love you, she said. I love you too. His voice was thin, frayed at the edges. She wanted to press him into the wall and never let go. Instead, she tucked the emergency blanket tighter around his chest, checked the sock she'd stuffed under his boot to cushion the swelling, and crawled back to her corner. That's when she saw it. Or thought she did. A flicker in the shadows behind the rock pile near the far end of the chamber. A shape. A shift. She froze. Hello. No response. Just the wind. Then again. Something small fast. A flicker of movement. She stood, her knees cracking. Cautiously, she approached. A spider, maybe. Or a bird. Could have been a trick of light. She knelt and pulled the rocks apart carefully. Her hands trembled. She couldn't afford a scorpion sting or a snake bite. Not down here. Not now. Nothing. Just an old bundle of roots and a pocket of dampness where water had once pooled. She stared at it for a long time. Her brain was starting to show its teeth. Back at Owen's side, she sat in silence for a while, chewing the last third of her half of a protein bar. She hated the taste of it, chalky and sweet like artificial vanilla had been smeared on sawdust. But it was something. She saved the other half for later, placed it in the pouch with the peanut butter. "Eat," she said, offering him a piece. He waved it off weakly. "Owen, I'm not hungry. That's not how this works." He didn't move. Rachel leaned in close. "Please." He took it. Chewed, slow and mechanical, like it wasn't food at all. Later, she began mapping again. This time not of terrain, but of time. She counted minutes between sips of water, traced the arc of light as it shifted across the wall, recorded how long it took Owen to drift off, how often he winced, how often he didn't. She was running out of things to do. The part of her that wanted to scream was now curled somewhere small behind her ribs, too tired to shout. Too numb. She had been trying for hours not to think about how long they had left. At some point she fell asleep, sitting up, her chin on her chest. She dreamed of white walls, fluorescent lights, the beep of a heart monitor, Owen lying still under a sheet. She jolted awake so hard she scraped her elbow against the rock. The shadows were long again. She checked his pulse. Still fast. Still shallow. He was sweating now, though the air was cold. She pressed her forehead to the canyon wall and stayed like that for a while, eyes closed. "I should go," she whispered. "I should go now." But she didn't move. Her body wouldn't let her. She'd been lying to herself. She wasn't waiting to see if things improved. She was afraid. What if she left and came back too late? What if she left and got lost? Or died of thirst? Or couldn't find the road again? And what if someone found her, days later, and Owen had died alone down here with nothing but a reflection of sky for comfort? She looked at him. He was sleeping. Or unconscious. His face twitched slightly, maybe dreaming. She reached for his hand. "Tomorrow," she said. "If you're not better, I'll go. I promise." And for the first time, she believed she meant it. Night again. The third they'd spent in the canyon. Though it had barely been more than a day and a half, time no longer made sense. It bled in every direction. Rachel curled beside Owen and listened to the breath that rattled against his throat. She began to cry silently, one hand pressed over her mouth, the other wrapped around his fingers. She cried until the silence swallowed it all. And then she slept, finally, with her head on his chest. Not because she felt safe, but because there was no strength left to stay awake. Chapter 8, Hunger Light. There was a moment before waking, just a sliver of peace, when Rachel thought she was home. Some fragment of a dream still clung to her, sheets tangled at her feet, the hum of a distant car, Owen's voice saying something she couldn't quite catch. Then came the smell. Not the warm salt of skin or the dusty scent of a summer bedroom, but the sour bite of old sweat and mud and blood. A breeze moved faintly through the canyon, rustling the emergency blanket, and with it came the tang of rock raw and sunburned, and something else beneath it. Decay. Rachel blinked her eyes open and sat up, spine crackling. Her neck screamed with stiffness. For a second, she didn't remember where she was. Then her gaze found the slab. The stone that pinned Owen's leg like a sentence, the one that hadn't shifted since the flood crashed through the day before. His face was turned toward her, pale in the early light. He looked asleep. But his chest was barely moving. Rachel scrambled to his side, slipping on loose grit. "Owen," she said. Her voice cracked. No answer. She leaned close. Hey. His eyelids twitched. A tremor ran through his cheek. He was alive. Barely. She knelt and touched his forehead. Burning. Worse than yesterday. She peeled back the blanket to check his leg. The swelling had reached his thigh now, and the skin just above the boot had taken on a strange, dusky hue, a kind of grayish purple that looked more like bruised fruit than flesh. She felt the blood drain from her face. This was the edge of something. Not the beginning of infection. Not the middle, the edge. "Hey," she whispered again. "You've got to talk to me." Owen opened his eyes with a flicker like a flame catching wind. "Morning," he rasped. Rachel swallowed. "Yeah." His lips were dry. She offered water. He took it like a man crawling through sand, barely conscious of his hand, just his mouth searching for the bottle. "Hurts," he said. "I know." He closed his eyes again. "Feels like something's chewing through me." She sat back hard and stared at the ceiling. The crack of sky looked narrower than it had the day before. Or maybe she was shrinking. For the first time, she truly didn't know what to do. Up until now, she'd been pretending. Rotating supplies. Pacing. Measuring shadows. Convincing herself that logic and planning would matter. But none of that had stopped the swelling. None of it had cooled his fever. None of it had bought her more time. They were out of food, half a spoon of peanut butter left. A third of a protein bar tucked away in the side pouch of her bag. And even if they'd had enough calories to limp along, it didn't matter. Not with that leg. Not with that color. Not with that look in his eyes. By mid-morning, Owen was hallucinating. He mumbled about a train. Said his dad was waiting for him. Reached for something in the air. Rachel caught his hand, held it still. "It's not real," she said. "Stay with me." He looked at her, confused, like he didn't recognize her face. Then he muttered something she couldn't understand and turned his head away. She tried water. Just a sip. He took it and then coughed, hard and dry. His lips cracked. She licked her fingers and pressed the moisture into them. That was the moment her hands began to shake. Not from fear. From hunger. She hadn't eaten in almost 24 hours, except for the piece of protein bar she forced down the night before. She hadn't even realized how hollow her stomach had become. The emptiness had bloomed so slowly it was like a new skin, worn without notice. Her hands trembled against Owen's chest, and she pulled them back quickly. Not now. Not yet. She rationed the peanut butter to herself. Just a dot on the tip of her finger. She licked it slowly, pressing it into the roof of her mouth, willing it to stretch into something meaningful. Then she tucked the jar back away, like it was treasure. Owen didn't ask for food. He hadn't even asked to move. Only once did he speak up clearly. "You'll go today," he said, eyes still closed. Rachel froze. "What?" "You'll climb out," he whispered. "You should have gone yesterday." Her heart thumped like something falling. "I'm not leaving you." "You will." "No. You have to." She grabbed his hand. "Not yet. Rachel. Not yet." Her voice cracked wide open. "I just need one more day. That's all." He didn't answer. She stared at him for a long time. She tried to distract herself. Organized the packs again. Filtered the remaining water. Cleaned the edge of his canteen. Stripped her socks and tried to dry them again in a sunbeam that lasted only 40 minutes. Every task was deliberate. Slow. As if the ritual would ward off what was coming. But Owen was slipping. By mid-afternoon, his fever had spiked so high that he couldn't keep his head lifted. His breath rasped. His lips turned bluish at the corners. Rachel didn't know if it was oxygen or blood flow or something worse. She tore the corner of the protein bar and chewed it until it dissolved. When she swallowed, it was like ash. Sometime after the sun dipped out of reach again, Rachel found herself sitting near the entrance of the chamber, head against the wall, mouth open. She hadn't realized she was crying. Not sobbing, just leaking. Quiet, continuous tears that slid along the dirt on her cheeks, stung in the cracked corners of her lips. The world had started to tilt. She felt small now, not metaphorically, not emotionally. Literally. As if her limbs had shrunk and her bones had pulled inward and the canyon had grown larger, grander, wider around her. The walls didn't feel safe anymore. They felt like jaws. Like she and Owen were being digested. "I'll go tomorrow," she whispered to no one. "I will." She didn't know who she was trying to convince. Owen was unconscious. Her own body was barely functioning. Her thighs ached with stiffness. Her back burned from the cold and the curled sleeping posture. Her lips were cracking. Her ears rang when she stood too quickly. She looked back at Owen's still form. "Just stay alive until morning," she said. "I swear to God, I'll go." Night came sharp and colorless. No stars, only the pale band of cloud rolling across the rim. Rachel lay beside him one last time, one hand resting over his chest. She counted every breath. And every time there was a pause that lasted too long, she whispered his name. And prayed. Not for salvation. Not for herself. Just for one more hour. Chapter 9. The Quiet Between Teeth. Someone said her name. She was sure of it. Not a whisper. Not a thought. A voice clear, real. Their .it came from somewhere above, or maybe beyond the rock wall near the entrance. Female, maybe. Familiar in a way that curled Rachel's stomach like a warning. She jolted upright, hands shooting out to brace herself against the stone. The chamber spun. Her heart slammed once, violently. "Owen?" He didn't answer. She turned her head toward him. Still breathing. Still pale. Still here. Her own name hung in the air like smoke. Rachel stood slowly, one hand gripping the ledge above their sleeping pads. She scanned the cracks in the canyon wall, listening. "Hello," she called out. Her voice cracked. "Nothing." "Who's there?" Silence. Even the wind had gone still. She backed up, chest rising and falling in quick bursts. Her tongue tasted like metal. The air was dry, stretched thin between her ribs. She was alone. Just her. Just Owen. And the canyon. Later, when the sun finally touched the far wall again, Rachel sat motionless, staring into the same patch of rock. Her hunger was worse now. Not loud. Not sharp. It had dulled to a kind of gravity. Her arms felt heavier. Her thoughts dragged like wet denim. She could hear her heartbeat in her ears, not in pulses. In words. It said, now, 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 now. But she didn't move. Owen hadn't spoken since the night before. His fever hadn't broken. His skin was damp and hot, and the breath that left his mouth now came with a smell that made Rachel gag involuntarily, sweet, sick, unnatural. Like something rotting. She didn't want to check his leg again, not because she feared what she'd see, but because she already knew. Mid-morning passed. Rachel sipped the last of the filtered water. Not all of it, just enough to coat her throat. She capped the bottle and tucked it under the blanket beside Owen's hip to keep it from overheating. She needed to climb out. Today. No more waiting. If she didn't go, they'd both die here. She stared at the walls again. The slope of the chamber, the jagged corridor they'd fallen through, the narrow gash overhead where light poured in like a punishment. From the ground, the way up didn't look impossible. But it also didn't look survivable. There were no carved footholds. No gear left. No rope. Just friction. Desperation. The right shoes, maybe. Balance. And a climb that ended in open desert, where the real fight would begin. She felt the pressure of tears at the back of her eyes. Then swallowed them. No time. She knelt beside Owen again. His eyes were open this time, but dull. Not tracking. Not here. Owen. She touched his cheek. His lids fluttered. Hey, you're with me. Where else would I be? His voice was shredded paper. Rachel leaned in closer. I have to go. He blinked. It took a long time for him to respond. Go. I'm going to climb out. Find help. Silence. He turned his head slightly, eyes barely focusing on her. Can you do that? I don't know. It came out before she could stop it. He managed the ghost of a smile. Honest. I like that. She tightened her grip on his hand. I don't want to leave you. I know. I'm so scared. So am I. She leaned her head to his shoulder and held still for a moment. His skin was burning. I'm coming back, she said. I swear. You'd better. She smiled, though her eyes burned. I'm trusting you not to die. Then you're a damn fool. She kissed his forehead. It took her nearly an hour to pack. She made a list aloud as she moved, half to stay organized, half to fight the rising static in her head. Water bottle, filter straw, compass, journal, pen, map, knife, headlamp, lighter, socks, dried socks, peanut butter, 1 spoon, jacket. She put everything in a dry bag and wrapped it tight. She left the remaining protein bar beside Owen. "You'll eat this," she wrote on a scrap of notebook paper and left it on his chest. "If I find out you didn't, I'll kill you myself." She sat back and looked at him for a long time. His lips moved. She leaned in. "Don't," he began. Then he passed out again. Rachel stared at him until her vision blurred. The climb wasn't graceful. It was barely even a climb. She scrabbled up the curved edge of the chamber, finding seams where water had cut into the stone. Her boots slid twice. Once she thought she'd fall, but her fingers caught a ledge and held fast. The first narrow chute smelled like bat guano and dust. She had to wedge herself sideways, inching like a lizard up toward the light. When she reached the halfway point, her arms started to shake. She paused. "Don't look down. Don't look down." She looked down. Saw the slab. Saw Owen's motionless figure. Saw the world she was about to leave behind. Her lungs seized. "You'll come back, you'll come back." She kept climbing. The rim came with a wind. Hot, dry, full of desert silence. Rachel dragged herself onto flat ground and collapsed to her knees. The sun felt like it was pressing through her skull. She vomited nothing, then got up. Slowly, step by step, toward the unknown. Chapter 10. The Desert Inside Me. The first hour out of the canyon was a lie. Rachel felt strong. Not in her body. Her legs were weak, her ribs ached, and her stomach had collapsed into a tight, hollow ball, but in her purpose. Every step away from the rim was a decision. A strike against death. A declaration that this wasn't how their story would end. The sun was already brutal overhead, but she didn't slow. She walked along the slick rock, tracing the edge of the canyon, eyes scanning the terrain for anything that resembled a trail, a footprint, a cairn, anything. The map she had was useless now. The flood had wiped the canyons clean, and no path she remembered looked the same from above. Still, she moved. "North," she muttered, checking the compass clipped to her jacket. "Northwest," then cut west. The sound of her own voice was strange, too loud in the air, like it didn't belong. It made her realize how long it had been since she'd truly spoken aloud without whispering. That hour, she was a soldier, a survivor, a woman with a mission. It didn't last. The second hour hurt. The adrenaline burned off fast. Her breath turned shallow, throat dry despite rationing her sips. The wind picked up dust, and it crusted at the corners of her eyes. There was no shade. Nothing but endless beige and red, rippling stone like waves frozen in the act of crashing. Rachel had expected the world to open up here, but the desert was a maze of its own. She kept hitting outcroppings and washes, circling rock walls that went nowhere, climbing ridges only to find more ridges on the other side. Every 20 minutes, she looked back. The canyon rim shrank in the distance. Still there. Still waiting. Owen was somewhere beneath that line. Lying still. Breathing, if he still was, in fevered gasps. She pictured him trying to read the note she left, blinking through sweat, trying to force down that bar. She prayed he wasn't cursing her name. She prayed harder that he was. Because that meant he was alive. By the third hour, her pace had slowed to a crawl. The sun was merciless. No clouds. No wind. Just heat, pressing into her like she was walking through a slow, invisible fire. She took tiny sips of water. 2 mouthfuls max. Then nothing for 30 minutes. Every time she saw a shadow on the rock ahead, she hoped it was a tree. It never was. There was a point where she thought she saw movement on the ridge above, a figure, dark against the light, but when she blinked, it was gone. Rachel didn't trust her eyes anymore. By midday, she found a dry wash with a shallow overhang, barely enough shade to crouch in. She slipped inside like an animal, dropped her pack, and let herself collapse. Her whole body buzzed. Her calves twitched involuntarily. Her tongue felt too large for her mouth. She had less than half a liter of water left. She unscrewed the bottle, held it up to the light. It sparkled. She forced herself to cap it again. Then she crawled to the wall and curled up. She didn't sleep, just closed her eyes and listened to the sound of blood moving through her head. It came in waves, each crash louder than the last. She pictured the slab again. The sound it made when it dropped. The snap of Owen's scream. The moment the canyon shifted from being a place to being a trap. The desert was open now. But it was no less a prison. She woke up to silence again. Her mouth was so dry it felt like the skin had cracked apart inside it. She tried to swallow. Nothing moved. Her fingers shook as she opened her bag and found the tiny plastic peanut butter jar. There was maybe half a spoonful left. Maybe less. She touched it with her finger, scraped the last bit, and smeared it against her gums. Chewed. It tasted like salt and sawdust. Her stomach lurched. Her body wanted more. Begged for it. She zipped the jar shut and put it away. Not yet. She walked again. Less steady now. Her feet dragged. She leaned slightly to the left, out of balance. The world had started to blur at the edges, too bright, too smooth, like she was inside a painting that hadn't finished drying. Somewhere ahead, she saw a shape. A stump. A tree. No. A person. Someone was standing on the rock outcropping above her. She stopped cold. "HY," she screamed. Her voice vanished instantly into the sky. The figure didn't move. She ran forward. The figure vanished. A boulder. Just a boulder. Rachel sank to her knees. Her thoughts began unraveling after that. She tried to count her steps. 1, 2, 3. But every time she hit 50, her mouth would go dry or her eyes would sting or the wind would shift and her focus would scatter. She tried singing a song. It came out in fragments. Take it easy, ride the lightning, hallelujah. Nothing made sense. The sun dropped lower. Her legs cramped. The compass pointed the same way, but it meant nothing now. Every rock looked like the last. She hadn't seen a tree in hours. No birds. No insects. Just silence. At some point, she started talking to Owen. Out loud. Like he was walking beside her. She told him about the dream she had last week, the one where they were in Paris and all the cars were missing steering wheels. She laughed. It sounded horrible in the empty air. She told him how sorry she was. She told him if he died before she got back, she'd never forgive him. She told him she'd die right there just to make him feel bad in the afterlife. She told him she loved him. Over and over and over. The sun began to drop. Rachel staggered to the top of a broad rock dome and fell flat on her face. The horizon blurred. Somewhere out there, a tree stood. A real one. A juniper, bent sideways by the wind. She laughed. Then crawled. Made it to the trunk and collapsed underneath. She clutched her pack to her chest and cried. Not because of pain. Not because of hunger. Just because she had made it one more day. And Owen hadn't. Not yet. Chapter 11. The Salt Line. She woke up choking on her own tongue. The night air was cold, but her body burned. Her skin clung to her clothes. Every muscle felt like it had been stretched too tight and left that way overnight. Rachel sat up slowly, eyes adjusting to the dark. The tree above her was a jagged silhouette against the sky, stars scattered like ash behind it. Her breath came shallow, like she was breathing through a cracked reed. The bottle was empty. She shook it anyway. Nothing. Not even a drop. She uncapped it and tilted it over her tongue, desperate. Not even a mist. She closed her eyes and rested the plastic against her lips. Her heart thumped in her ears. Too loud. Too fast. The first signs of real dehydration. The kind that didn't just dry you out, but killed you. Rachel crawled out from under the tree. The rock was still warm beneath her hands, holding the heat from the day like a cruel joke. She tried to stand, but her knees gave. She fell forward and barely caught herself. She laughed. It sounded like gravel in a cup. The compass was still in her jacket pocket. She pulled it out and stared at it, like it was a person. Like it could speak. Northwest. Still northwest. She had no idea if that was the right direction anymore. A long time later, minutes or hours, she couldn't tell, she made it to her feet. The desert was colorless. Blue and black and silver. The stars stretched from horizon to horizon, and the moon painted the canyon rim behind her in sharp relief. She turned away from it. She couldn't look at the place Owen still lay. Not now. Not if she wanted to keep moving. She started walking. Her boots scraped. Her heel dragged slightly. She listed to the left without meaning to. The quiet was too loud again. She started humming just to keep something in the air. Old songs. Fragments. Rhythms she barely remembered. A child's lullaby. Some Fleetwood Mac chorus. A hymn she didn't know she still remembered. Oh death, won't you spare me over till another year? She stopped cold. That one had come from nowhere. She didn't even believe in God. Not like that. But something about the melody felt older than the ground beneath her. It stuck in her throat. She looked up. The stars looked back. By the time the first light broke over the rocks, her lips had cracked clean open. Her hands were shaking. Her joints ached. She felt hot and cold at the same time, waves rolling up through her spine. She was no longer walking in a straight line. The compass needle still pointed northwest, but her feet wandered. She found herself veering toward shadows without realizing it. Her eyes kept playing tricks, water in the distance, birds overhead, the distant sound of rushing somewhere just beyond reach. None of it real. Then she saw the salt line. It glistened on the rock in front of her, curved and white, like a necklace flung across the sandstone. She stepped closer. It wasn't salt. It was a trail. A stain. She knelt and touched it. The rock was smoother here, worn by something that had flowed over it again and again. Water. Rain runoff, maybe. She looked uphill. A narrow crevice rose between two slabs of red stone. She followed it. 30 minutes later, she found the basin. Dry. Of course it was dry. But at the edge, where the sand met stone, she saw moisture, just barely. The kind that turned the grains darker, cooler to the touch. She dropped to her knees and began digging. Hands first. Then with the lid of her peanut butter jar. A few inches in, water welled up. Rachel sobbed. It was brown, muddy, clouded with silt. She didn't care. She filtered it 3 times through her bandana, then filled her bottle and capped it tight. Only after she sat back, lips covered in dirt, did she realize she had tears on her cheeks. She stayed there a while. Not long. Just long enough to breathe. To let the fire in her head dim slightly. Then she stood. She knew what came next. The worst part. The part where she had to choose, keep going or turn back. Go farther and hope for a ranger, a camp, a signal, anything. Or risk the climb again, bring the water back to Owen, and pray he was still alive. Her fingers curled around the bottle. It was enough for one person to survive another day. Barely. She looked down at the water in her hands. And she saw his face. Not sick. Not dying. Just smiling. You're the only person I trust, he'd said once, long before this trip. Rachel turned around. And started walking back. Chapter 12. A body full of smoke. The water sloshed softly in the bottle against her hip. It was the sound of life, and the sound of weight. Every step made her more aware of it, the pull on her shoulder, the swing of her pack, the dull throb in her arm from holding it too tight for too long. Rachel didn't dare let it go. She had filtered what she could, but it was still murky, still thick with grit, the taste of sandstone lingering in her mouth. But it was water. Real water. Enough to matter. She kept checking the sun. Not because it helped, but because it reminded her time was still moving. That somewhere in the canyon below, Owen was still breathing. Or not. The climb back was worse than she imagined. She had marked the way with a series of small stacked rocks on her way out. Crude cairns no higher than her shin. Some had fallen. Others had been scattered by wind or passing animals. She remarked them as she walked, pausing at each to catch her breath. The desert had changed behind her, even though she had only been gone a day. The rock felt sharper now, the shadows thinner, the wind less like a breeze and more like the breath of something old and watching. Her vision swam. She passed a boulder she thought she recognized, then passed it again, somehow. She circled back, found her prints, corrected herself. Every mistake was a stab of panic, every detour a possible death sentence. By noon, her legs were seizing. Not with pain, she'd moved past pain hours ago. This was something deeper, like her muscles were losing memory, like her bones wanted to lie down and not get up. She stopped under a ledge and sat with her head between her knees, arms wrapped tight around the bottle. Her heartbeat pounded against her fingers. It was no longer panic. It was wearing out, like a motor run too long. She didn't sleep, but she drifted. Half-dreams flickered behind her eyes, Owen calling her name, the canyon filling with water, the moment the slab dropped like God had pulled a lever. She saw herself in a mirror once, in a bathroom that didn't exist, her mouth bleeding. She blinked, and the ledge was gone. The sun had moved. She had to get up. She had to move. By mid-afternoon, she was nearing the rim. She recognized the split in the rock, like a lightning bolt carved through the red. The slope was narrow, the edge choked with boulders. She'd slid down this gap on her way out. Climbing back would be worse. She drank one mouthful of water. Only one. Then she capped the bottle and tied it tighter. She didn't want to be empty when she found him. If she found him. The climb down was hell. She moved slowly, sideways, like a crab. Her shoes slipped twice. Once she had to brace herself against the wall, full body pressed flat, waiting for the trembling in her legs to stop. The bottle clanged against the rock. She held it tighter. At one point, she screamed. Not words. Just sound. A release. The canyon caught it and swallowed it whole. The chamber came into view with no fanfare. Just the same sloping entry, the curve of light, the smell. She stopped 10 feet from the ledge and crouched low. Her stomach coiled. Something was wrong. The silence had changed. She descended into the chamber like stepping into a dream she wasn't sure she wanted to re-enter. The slab was still there. Owen was. Rachel dropped to her knees. He hadn't moved. His face was turned to the side, eyes shut. For a second, the world blurred. Then she saw the rise of his chest. Barely. But it was there. He was alive. She ran to him. Owen, she gasped. Hey, look at me. His skin was clammy, pale, but his lips parted. Rachel, I'm here. I'm back. He blinked. Twice. You left. I brought water. Didn't think you'd, he coughed, weakly, make it. She lifted the bottle, unscrewed it, and touched it gently to his lips. Small sips. Slow. He drank. Swallowed. Coughed again. But he drank. And he didn't stop. When he finally pulled away, he let out a breath that shook his whole body. Rachel stared at him. You okay? He smiled faintly. That's a stupid question. She laughed, then cried, then laughed again. And he reached up and touched her face. You look awful. Thanks. I mean it. I know. They sat like that for a long time. Later, after he'd drunk half the bottle, Rachel crawled into the blanket beside him and lay her head on his shoulder. You came back, he whispered. I said I would. You always do. She didn't answer. There was nothing left to say. The night closed in around them like a fist, and she fell asleep with his fingers tangled in hers, a body full of smoke and a heart still beating. Chapter 13, Where the Bones Don't Lie. The second morning began in silence. Not just the silence of a canyon empty, wide, echoless, but a smothered silence. Like the world was holding its breath. Like something had curled over the chamber and sealed them in. Rachel sat cross-legged beside Owen, sipping the last of the water. She'd rationed it through the night, waking every few hours to touch it to his lips. He drank without opening his eyes. Sleep, if it came at all, had the texture of fever, thin, twitching, haunted. Now he lay still. Too still. "Hey," she said, nudging his shoulder. "Sun's up." His eyelids flickered, then opened. She waited for a word, a smile, a groan, anything. But he only stared at the ceiling, breathing slowly. "Owen?" Finally, he blinked. "You came back," he whispered. "You already said that yesterday." He turned his head, wincing. "I thought that was a dream." "Nope. I'm real. Unfortunately." "Unfortunately," he echoed, with the ghost of a grin. She tried to smile back, but her stomach twisted. The water was gone before noon. Rachel had held back 2 final mouthfuls. One for him, one for her. He drank his. She waited to drink hers. For a reason she couldn't name. She sat for a long time beside him, fingers tight around the bottle, staring at the rock wall opposite. When she finally tipped it back, it tasted like metal. Nothing left. His leg was worse. The skin just above the boot was discolored now, spreading purple-gray, the color of dried blood and something deeper. His calf was twice its normal size, the tension in the flesh pushing against the seams of his pants. When she peeled back the fabric, the smell hit her like a blow. She gagged, covered her mouth, breathed through her teeth. Infection. Not theoretical anymore. Not a maybe. Not a wait and see. It was here. It was eating him alive. "Hey," she said gently. "I need to look at your leg, okay?" He didn't respond. She knelt and began unwrapping the lower part of his pants. His skin was hot to the touch. The swelling had reached his thigh. There was no break in the skin, but the flesh looked glossy, stretched, as if it could split at any second. She pressed his ankle lightly. He screamed. The sound echoed against the stone and bounced back, twice as loud. Rachel flinched. I'm sorry, I just..." He bit his knuckle and shook his head. "I think it's spreading." "No shit." She sat back on her heels. They both breathed hard for a while. "I need to go again," she said after a long time. Owen didn't answer. I know, I just got back. But there's no more water. And your fever's getting worse. We need antibiotics. A chopper. Anything." His eyes opened slowly. "Don't." "What?" "Don't lie." "I'm not lying. You're not coming back next time." She stiffened. He looked at her, clear-eyed for the first time in hours. "I know what this is." "You don't." "Yes, I do." Rachel clenched her jaw. "I'm not letting you die here." He smiled, gentle, not mocking. "You don't get to decide that." "Well, neither do you." Silence. Then she whispered, "Please." She spent the rest of the afternoon prepping. It was like before, organizing, counting, packing slowly. But this time, every gesture felt heavier. She kept looking at him, kept checking that his chest was still rising. He talked less now. When he did, it was strange. "Remember that dog in New Mexico?" he asked once. "What?" "Your cousin's. The one that ate a whole leather glove." Rachel blinked, then remembered. "Yeah, threw it up 3 days later." She said it came out whole. It smelled like gasoline. Owen smiled faintly. "God, we were young." "You still are." He turned his head toward her. "You're going to get out." "We are." "No." She looked away. At sunset, she knelt beside him. "I'm going tonight." He didn't move. "I'll wait till the air cools. Then I'll go. Head west. If I don't find anyone in 2 days, I'll come back." "You won't." "I will." "Rachel." She turned to him. "I don't want you to come back if it's too late." Her throat closed. "Don't say that. Please. Promise me." "No. You have to." "I can't." He reached for her hand. His grip was weak, but the look in his eyes was sharp. "Then you're not the woman I thought you were." She laughed once, then cried. He touched her face. "I love you." "Don't," she whispered. "Don't say goodbye." "Not goodbye," he said. Just go. The stars were coming out when she stood again. She took one final look at the chamber, at the slab, at him. He looked so small now, so quiet. She crouched beside him, pressed her forehead to his, and stayed there until she could breathe again. Then she walked away, out into the night, carrying nothing but a knife, a bottle, and a prayer. Chapter 14. West is the way you die. The night air was cool but dry, and the moment Rachel left the canyon floor behind, it felt like the silence changed. Down there, the quiet had been oppressive, like a weight on her chest. Up here, it was hollow. Soundless, yes, but thinner somehow, as if the wind had scraped it clean. She climbed for a while by headlamp, choosing a path along the slope she'd first descended with Owen. The cliff edge loomed above like a sleeping thing, and every ledge felt steeper than she remembered. Her shoulders ached from the weight of the pack. She hadn't wanted to take much, just water, the map, her phone, a flare, and a few meager scraps of food, but still, it pulled at her spine like guilt. And underneath it all was one thudding thought: he's still down there. She paused once and looked back. Nothing but darkness behind her. No sound. No motion. She turned and kept going. By midnight, she reached the first plateau. The sky was cloudless, smeared with stars, so thick and bright it almost hurt to look at them. The moon hadn't risen yet, and without it, the world looked unreal, shadowless, shallow, like a photograph underexposed. Rachel checked the map. No markers. No trails. Just an unshaded band labeled Open Slick Rock. There were no directions because there were no directions. Only the compass. Only west. Her boots scraped and slid on the sandstone, worn smooth by thousands of years of wind and water. The rock looked the same in every direction, pale, flat, ribbed with ridges, dotted with the occasional weathered tree root or bone-dry crevice. Time became meaningless. The stars didn't move fast enough to measure. Her shadow, long and soft from the headlamp, seemed to drift beside her like a second body. A ghost. She didn't speak. Didn't sing. Didn't pray. Only walked. By 2 a.m., the wind picked up. Not strong, but steady. Dry as ash. It rolled across the landscape and tugged at her hair, lifted the edge of her collar, whispered in her ears like it was trying to say something but couldn't quite form the words. She walked faster. Then slower. Then stopped. Somewhere out there, to her left, a shape shifted in the dark. She swung her light toward it. Nothing. Just a cluster of rocks. Or maybe a tree. Or maybe not. She didn't investigate. Her throat dried faster than she expected. Even after saving the last of the canyon water for the climb, her mouth was already past parched. It wasn't just thirst, it was heat loss, wind burn, breath evaporating too fast. She tried rationing the first bottle. 3 sips an hour. Then 2. Then 1. She kept the bottle tucked inside her jacket to keep it cool. But the weight of it pressed against her like shame. She was already losing. Dawn came like blood seeping up from beneath the rock. Not golden. Not soft. Just red and raw and full of the kind of light that burns your skin before it gives warmth. The canyon was long gone behind her now. So was the path she'd taken. So was the map. She knew she was still heading west. But that was all. No roads. No signs. Just her. And the whispering wind. She found the first animal bones near midday. A scattering of bleached ribs, half buried in sand, picked clean. Maybe a deer. Or a coyote. Next to it, a dry puddle of something dark. Old blood, maybe. She turned her head quickly and walked faster. 2 hours later, she passed another skeleton. This time human. Or close enough to make her stop cold. A boot. Torn jeans. A scrap of canvas backpack curled like a dead leaf. No flesh left. No face. Just bones. Rachel didn't look too long. Didn't take anything. Just kept going. The sun was high now. She staggered into a ravine for shade and crouched behind a boulder. Her skin was flushed and tight. Her tongue stuck to the roof of her mouth. The wind had died, but the air was thick now. Heavier. She checked the water. 1.5 bottles left. No new sources in sight. She pressed her forehead to her knees and breathed shallow. Her mind wandered without permission. He's probably unconscious. Maybe worse. You waited too long. She dug her fingers into the dirt until her knuckles cracked. No, she whispered. No. Then louder. No. But no one answered. By late afternoon, she saw the ridge. It rose suddenly out of the earth like a sleeping animal, jagged and pale, too steep to cross. She walked the edge for almost an hour, hoping for a break or pass, but it only got sharper, more narrow. She stood at the base and stared. There was no trail. Just a sloped climb of sharp-angled sandstone. She glanced behind her. Open desert. Sun baking the rock until it shimmered. No going back. So she climbed. It took nearly 40 minutes. Hands scraped. Knees bruised. Twice she slipped and cut her palm. When she finally reached the top, she almost collapsed. But then, she saw it. In the far distance. A line. Thin, straight, dark. Man-made. A road. Or a fence. Or tracks. Her heart surged. Please, she whispered. Please, God. She pulled the binoculars from her bag. Lifted them with shaking hands. Looked. A highway. At least 1.5 miles away, running like a black ribbon across the horizon. No cars. But it was something. She laughed, a strangled, cracked sound. Then cried. Then stood. And kept walking. Chapter 15. Lying in the dust. She walked toward the highway like it was a mirage. Her legs didn't feel like legs anymore. They were too heavy, too slow, disconnected from the messages her brain kept sending. Left. Right. Again. The sun had risen fully now, an open eye in a bleached sky. No clouds. No shade. Not even a wind to lean against. Just heat. Rachel's clothes clung to her, stiff with salt and sweat. Every breath felt filtered through gauze, shallow and unsatisfying. The air had weight now, like it had thickened in the space between her and the rest of the world. The road didn't get closer. Or maybe it did, but so slowly she couldn't tell. By mid-morning, she could see the shimmer. Not on the road itself, but around it. The kind of heat distortion that makes the whole world look like it's underwater. It danced and rippled and wavered until the blacktop ahead seemed to split into 2, then 3, then nothing at all. The line just vanished, swallowed by a phantom of its own making. She blinked hard, but her vision didn't clear. Her head felt light. A thin band of pressure had started behind her eyes, like something was expanding in her skull. She stopped walking and crouched slowly, knees aching. Unclipped her second-to-last bottle from her pack. Held it in her hands for too long before opening it. Then drank. 3 gulps. 4. She wanted 5, but she forced herself to stop. Just enough to wet her mouth. She tucked the bottle back in and stood. The road still hadn't moved. Or maybe she hadn't. By noon, the land around her started to change. Low, dry brush crept in from the flats. Scattered, brittle. Half dead. But still life. Or something like it. A piece of fence appeared to the north, collapsed and half buried in sand. Beyond it, an old tire. Shredded and sun-bleached. She thought she saw the curve of a rusted-out car door, but it vanished when she blinked. Her lips were cracked now. Her skin pinked with burn. One arm trembled when she tried to lift it. The weight of the pack was unbearable. But she kept walking. She had no other choice. She reached the road in the early afternoon. There were no cars. No signs. Just pavement, cracked and faded and hot enough to burn. She dropped to her knees beside it and stared at the asphalt. The edge of the line. The end of the desert. The start of maybe. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. She tried to cry, but the tears wouldn't come. She waited. 10 minutes. Then 20. Still no one. No rumble of tires. No dust in the distance. Just sky and rock and heat. She pulled her phone from her pocket and tapped the screen. No service. Of course. She stared at the empty signal bars, then turned the phone off to save power. Maybe later, maybe just a mile up, it would work. Maybe. Rachel sat at the side of the road for almost an hour. She tried waving once when she thought she saw a shape in the distance, but it wasn't a car. Just a bird. A vulture. It circled wide, slow arcs, drifting on thermals like it had all the time in the world. She laughed. A dry, cracked sound. Then stood. She had to do something. Couldn't just wait. Couldn't just sit. So she walked. The road curved south a few miles in. No markers. No towns on the map. No mileage signs. But asphalt was easier to walk than open rock. At least for a little while. Then the heat turned it soft. Sticky. Her boots began to catch, the rubber tacking slightly with each step. It slowed her down, made her feel like she was walking on tar. The sun was directly overhead now. She could see the shimmer in her own shadow. She needed shelter. Even an overhang. Anything. And then off the right shoulder, she saw it. A drainage culvert. It wasn't much. Concrete tunnel. Dry bed. Graffiti scrawled along the mouth. But it was shade. She dropped to her hands and knees and crawled into the dark. The air inside was 10 degrees cooler. It smelled like dust and rust and sunburnt weeds. She curled up on one side and pressed her cheek to the cement. It felt good. Cold. Real. Her whole body sighed into the ground. She shut her eyes. Just for a minute. Just long enough to breathe. When she woke, the sun had moved. She didn't remember falling asleep. Didn't know how long she'd been out. A thin line of drool had dried on her chin. Her skin stung where her clothes had bunched and left streaks of raw flesh behind. She sat up too fast and nearly passed out. The headache was worse now. Her mouth was so dry it felt furry. She fumbled for the last bottle of water. Shook it. Still half full. She drank all of it. Didn't care. It was either that or collapse. Back on the road. Still no cars. No sound but the scuff of her boots and the wind whispering past like it had somewhere better to be. She thought about screaming. But it would only make her throat worse. So she walked. And walked. And walked. At some point near dusk, she saw the sign. It wasn't much. Just a green mile marker. Faded. Shot once. County Route 38 to 6 miles. Below it, an arrow. Rachel stared at it like it was a religious vision. She reached out and touched the metal, just to prove it was real. Then she looked down the direction it pointed. More road. Flat and endless and empty. But she started walking. She didn't make it 6 miles. Not that night. Her vision doubled twice. She stumbled. Then fell. Twice. Her feet were bleeding now. Blisters torn open inside the boot. Skin raw. Her whole body was a series of slow, radiating aches, muscle and bone humming under the weight of desperation. She saw another culvert ahead. Crawled toward it. Didn't even make it inside. Collapsed just before the mouth. Face to the ground. Sometime during the night, it rained. Not much. Just a mist. A light spatter of heaven. She lifted her face toward it and stuck out her tongue. Tasted dirt. Closed her eyes. Dreamed of Owen. He was in the canyon, still alive, still waiting. She saw his face like it was pressed to glass. Smiling, just barely. Saying her name. Saying, "I knew you'd come back." She woke with a jolt. The rain was gone. But the road was still there. So she kept walking. Chapter 16. North of Nothing. She didn't look back when she climbed out of the canyon. There was no dramatic pause, no final glance at the place that had nearly killed them both. She didn't need one. It was already burned behind her eyes. Every ledge. Every turn. The white room. The red crack. Owen's blood on the sandstone. She didn't want to remember it. But she took it with her anyway. It followed her as she hauled her body up the last slope, as her fingernails scraped the rock, as her boots slipped and she bit her tongue hard enough to taste blood. It followed her when she crested the final rise and the world opened wide and brutal before her. She had made it out. But the canyon wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. The land beyond stretched flat and dry, rippling with false promises. Heat waves shimmered on the horizon. The earth changed color every mile, pale clay, rust, bone. Cactus and scrub danced low across the plain like shadows trying to hide. No road. No buildings. Not even a power line. Just silence and space and sun. Rachel paused at the rim and caught her breath. The sun was behind her now, low and hazy. Her shadow stretched long across the slope. She adjusted her pack, checked the water, less than half a bottle left, and started walking. She chose east. The slope was gentler that way, and something about the way the land fell made her think of roads, of drainage paths, of runoff, and people. The air here smelled different. Not canyon cool, but sun-baked and sharp, with a strange metallic tang that clung to the back of her throat. She tried not to cough. Every step felt stolen. Her body wasn't ready for this. Not after the day and a half in the gorge. Not after the climb. But stopping meant dying. Out here, stillness wasn't rest, it was rot. And the wind was dry enough to whisper that fact in her ears again and again. She reached a patch of packed earth that looked like an old vehicle path. Barely more than tire ghosts in the dust, but it looked like something human had once passed through. It curved slightly northeast. She followed it. Night fell fast in the desert. The air cooled, but not enough to undo the damage. Rachel's skin stung from sunburn. Her lips were cracked. Her sweat had dried to salt on her neck and collarbone. She could feel her pulse in her teeth. When the moon rose, pale and broken, she paused. Her legs ached like they'd been hammered. She had to rest. Just for a minute. She found a boulder near the path and leaned her back against it, eyes scanning the night. There was no sound. No insects. No wind. Even the stars looked silent. She closed her eyes. Told herself she'd only doze for a few seconds. But the darkness was deep. And she didn't wake until dawn. The second morning was worse. Her body didn't want to move. Her joints had stiffened. Her skin was swollen and tight. Her stomach ached, hollow and mean. She forced herself up and drank the last of the water. Savoring it was a luxury she couldn't afford. She still hadn't seen a single sign of life. No people. No animals. Not even birds. But the path continued. It wasn't much, but it had shape. That was enough. Around midday, she crested a shallow ridge and stopped cold. There, in the distance, maybe 2 miles out, was something. Not desert. Not canyon. Structures. She blinked. Shielded her eyes. Yes. Low buildings. A water tower. A broken fence. Sunlight glinting off what looked like corrugated metal. A town. Or what was left of one. She started running. Her body wasn't built for speed anymore. Her stride was crooked, breath short, each step a throb of warning. But she ran anyway. Fell once. Got back up. Skinned her hand on gravel. Didn't care. The town got closer. Closer. And then, finally, she reached it. It wasn't a town. Not anymore. It was a graveyard of metal and sand. 6 buildings. 3 roofs caved in. Doors hanging open, windows broken, paint long since burned away. The water tower was rusted through and leaning like a dying animal. Rachel staggered through the first narrow street and shouted, "Hello." Her voice cracked in the dry air. Nothing answered. She tried again. "I need help." Silence. Just the whistle of breeze between ruined walls. She pushed into the nearest building. An old service station, judging by the bones of the pumps outside. Inside was rubble and dust. A few scattered papers. Shelves warped and empty. No people. No power. No phone. She tried the next building. And the next. Each one emptier than the last. A former store. A garage. A single home with sun-faded photos still on the wall, faces too bleached to recognize. Whoever had lived here was gone. Not recently. Years. Decades. Ghosts. She dropped to her knees in the shade of a broken porch and stared at the ground. Her lips moved, but she didn't say anything, just shaped the word no again and again. The wind shifted, sending grit across the lot in soft, hissing waves. Rachel curled forward and pressed her forehead to her knees. She had come so far. The canyon, the climb, the miles under the sun. She was supposed to find someone. A phone, a gas station, a car, something. But there was nothing here. Only the hollow shell of a place that had died too long ago to help her. She wanted to scream, but she didn't have the strength. After almost an hour, she stood again, hands shaking, body screaming, and walked to the water tower. There was a ladder on one side, rusted to hell. She climbed it anyway. At the top, the platform creaked under her weight, but it held. She turned slowly in place, scanning the land. North, nothing. East, more desert. South, the way she came. And west, just past the far edge of the ghost town, a road. Barely visible, a thin black line crawling past a rise. But it was there. Rachel almost sobbed. Not much, but more than what she had. She climbed down, slower this time. Crossed the empty lot. Reached the edge of town and stood on the rim of a shallow gulch that sloped down toward the road. There was a wrecked truck at the bottom. Rusted out. Half sunk into the earth. She didn't stop to examine it. Just kept walking. Her boots slipped once in the sand. She caught herself on her hands. Kept going. When she finally stepped onto the road, it was like crossing some invisible line between nowhere and maybe. It was paved. Faded, but intact. And heading west. She didn't know where it led. But west felt right. She turned that way and started walking again. The wind picked up in the late afternoon. It blew hard across the plain, kicking grit into her eyes and teeth. She used her shirt to cover her face. Bent low. Kept moving. The road curved again. And there on the far side was a sign. Faded. Bent. But still standing. State Route 178, junction 12 miles. 12 miles. 12 miles to something. To somewhere. She laughed, an ugly, broken sound. 12 miles might as well be 1,000. But she had to try. Owen was still waiting. He was still alive. He had to be. As the sun dropped behind her, Rachel pressed forward into the dark. Each step a war. Each breath a promise. She didn't know how far she'd make it tonight. But she would make it somehow. Because now, finally, there was a path. And paths meant people. And people meant hope. And hope was the only thing that hadn't died yet. Chapter 17, Mile 12. The first mile was the easiest. That wasn't saying much. Rachel was limping, half blind with grit, the skin across her nose and cheeks peeling in raw flakes. Her hands ached. Her ribs ached. Her bones ached. But she was on pavement now, real pavement. Her boots slapped against it with a rhythm she hadn't heard in days, and for a few moments, the sound was enough to trick her into believing she was safe. She wasn't. But she was closer. She counted her steps. 100, then 100 more. Each one took her farther from the canyon. Farther from the White Room. Farther from Owen. But closer to someone who could help him. 12 miles. She could do 12 miles. She had to. By mile 2, the wind picked up again. Not the dusty, gritty kind. This was different, cooler, a little sharper, like weather was shifting somewhere unseen. The clouds above her bled pink at the edges. Evening was coming fast. She didn't want to think about night. Not out here. Not again. There was no shelter. No sagebrush tall enough to lie under. No boulders to break the wind. The flatness of the desert made everything more exposed. It wasn't like the canyon, where the walls enclosed you. Here, it was just Rachel and the void. And the road. She focused on the road. She reached a mile marker with the number 10 stenciled on its face in cracked paint. She ran her fingers over the numbers. 2 miles down. 10 to go. She looked back only once. There was no one behind her. The canyon might as well have been on another planet. The silence out here wasn't peaceful. It was dead. No insects. No birds. The hum of civilization was miles away. Rachel walked faster. By mile 5, her legs were buckling. She couldn't feel her fingers anymore. Her water was long gone, and her throat had turned to sandpaper. Her mouth was dry enough that her tongue stuck to the roof of it, and her lips split deeper with every breath. Her neck was cramping from constantly scanning the horizon, hoping for movement, hoping for signs. Nothing yet. She stumbled and caught herself on the edge of the pavement, scraping her palm open again. The blood welled up, slow and dark, then vanished into the dust when she wiped it away. She didn't stop. There was no point in tending to anything until she had help. If she stopped, she wouldn't start again. The sun disappeared without fanfare. One moment it was there, hanging low and red behind her, and the next it was gone, and cold slipped in like a blade between her shoulder blades. Her breath fogged faintly in the cooling air. She needed to keep moving to stay warm, but her limbs were starting to forget how to respond. Her knees wobbled. Her back hunched. She'd wrapped her shirt around her shoulders like a shawl, but the sweat in the fabric turned it icy against her skin. She forced herself to focus. Another mile. Just one more. She repeated it like a prayer. Mile 7 passed with no fanfare. But near mile 8, she saw something that made her stop. Headlights. Far away. Tiny. Moving slow. Rachel squinted hard, blinking against the wind. Yes! A pair of lights, bobbing and bright and distant. She started waving. Not screaming, her voice was shot. But she raised both arms and waved them side to side, weaving across the road like a broken flag. The lights didn't change direction. Not yet. She waved harder. Please, she croaked. Please. The wind tore the word away. She dropped to her knees and pulled the flashlight from her pack, the little one Owen had packed, the one they'd barely used, and switched it on. She pointed it at the car. Switched it off. On again. Off. On. Signaling SOS as best she could manage. The lights kept coming. Closer. Slower. And then they stopped. She ran. Limped. Dragged herself forward as fast as she could. The vehicle, a truck, began to reverse slowly toward her. Dust kicked up behind its tires. The brake lights burned red through the haze. When she got close enough to see the silhouette of a driver, she collapsed. She didn't mean to. Her legs just folded beneath her. Her hands hit the pavement. And she couldn't get up. The truck door slammed. Boots pounded the ground. Hey, you okay? A man's voice. Rough, worried. Rachel tried to lift her head. She managed a single word. Owen. The man dropped to his knees beside her. Don't move. Jesus, how long have you been out here? Rachel blinked up at him. He had a beard. A ranger's hat. A badge on his shirt. I need help, she choked. We've got help, he said, already speaking into his radio. Got a female hiker, dehydrated and possibly hypothermic, found her about 8 miles east of Route 178 Junction. Send EMS. He turned back to her, face lit by the truck's headlights. Can you tell me your name? She nodded, barely. Rachel. All right, Rachel. You're gonna be okay now. Just hang on. We've got medics coming. She shook her head. No, not me. Him. You have to find him. He's still down there. He's trapped. The ranger froze for a beat. Then leaned in closer. Who's trapped? My fiancé. Owen. We were hiking the canyon. A flood hit. He's stuck. I left him there. I had to go. Her breath was breaking in sharp pieces now. The tears stung worse than the wind. The ranger was already back on the radio, relaying what she'd said. A rescue. She had made it. Owen had a chance. They put her in the back of the truck, wrapped her in blankets, gave her water drop by drop. She could barely hold the bottle. She felt like she was floating. Someone asked her questions. She answered as best she could. Coordinates. Landmarks. Time frames. She couldn't remember it all. They kept her awake until the ambulance arrived. Bright lights. Warm hands. Monitors beeping. They lifted her in. And then she was moving fast down the road, away from the void, toward something real. Rachel drifted in and out of awareness. The paramedics talked to each other in shorthand. One of them adjusted her for. Another took her vitals. But her mind stayed behind. In the canyon. With Owen. She could still see him lying there. Hear his voice in the dark. Feel the way his fingers gripped hers, even when they shook. She had done it. She had made it out. But the story wasn't over yet. Now came the hardest part. Waiting. Chapter 18. Blood and Dust. The white of the hospital walls was too clean. Sterile. Cold. Still. Nothing in them resembled the canyon, not the flickering lights above her bed, not the quiet hum of monitors, not the voices in the hallway behind glass doors. And yet, the canyon was still with her. Buried in her skin, in her hair, under her fingernails. A fine film of dust no scrub down could touch. She could still feel the sandstone pressed against her shoulder blades when she closed her eyes. Still feel Owen's hand in hers. She couldn't feel it now. And that was the worst part. They'd taken her straight from the ambulance to the trauma wing. A nurse clipped an oxygen mask over her face. Saline burned through in 4-line. Blood pressure cuff. Heart monitor. Pulse oximeter. She didn't protest any of it. Not even when they cut the remains of her shirt from her shoulders or peeled the socks off her blistered feet. Her body had stopped feeling like her own a long time ago. "Are you allergic to anything?" a nurse asked. Rachel opened her mouth, but nothing came out. The nurse repeated the question, gentler. Rachel blinked and whispered no. The lights above her seemed to breathe in and out. The doctor's name was Patel. He moved with calm precision, giving her facts in slow, clear segments. She had second-degree burns on both shoulders. Superficial lacerations across her palms and knees. Moderate dehydration. A mild concussion. Her core temperature had dropped below 95 degrees. They were warming her now. Slowly. He said it all like he'd said it 100 times. Rachel didn't respond until he said, "We'll keep you for observation for the next 24 hours. "No," she croaked. "I have to go back." Dr. Patel tilted his head. "Back where?" To him. The room blurred. "I have to go back," she whispered again. "You don't understand. He's alone. He's hurt. I left him." The nurse glanced at the monitor. Her heart rate was spiking. Dr. Patel nodded slowly. "Rachel, there's already a search team en route. They've got your coordinates. You did the right thing coming out. You saved his life." She turned her face toward the wall. But what if she hadn't? She didn't sleep that night. The hospital bed felt like stone beneath her, no matter how many blankets they layered on top. Her burns throbbed. Her eyes wouldn't close. Every time she started to drift, she saw Owen trapped, bloodied, whispering her name in the dark. She tried to remember how he looked before the flood. Sunlight in his hair. His laugh echoing off the canyon walls. The way his hand found hers without needing to look. She couldn't hold on to the memory. It slipped through her like water through cracked rock. At 4:12 a.m., she asked the nurse if there was any word. Not yet. They promised someone would tell her the second there was. She waited anyway. Every minute felt like a drop of water echoing in an empty chamber. By morning, they allowed her to shower. The nurse wheeled in a chair with waterproof cushions. "We'll help you," she said gently. "You shouldn't stand too long." Rachel didn't argue. She barely recognized herself in the mirror. Her face was swollen from sun exposure, her lips split, her eyelids purple with exhaustion. Her collarbone jutted like a knife beneath the skin. She looked like someone who'd been lost for weeks, not days. The warm water made her cry. Not from pain. Just the feeling of it, clean, steady, unrelenting, something that didn't sting or crush or scrape. The pressure on her scalp nearly undid her. She stood in it too long. The nurse had to coax her out. Wrapped in a hospital gown, she sat in the wheelchair and stared at the floor tiles while the nurse brushed her hair. She whispered, "They'll find him, right?" The nurse paused, then rested a hand lightly on her shoulder. "We're all hoping they already have." The first update came mid-morning. A man in plain clothes stepped into her room. His badge was clipped to his hip. He introduced himself as Captain Hayward, Search and Rescue. "We found the canyon entrance," he said. "Our guys are moving carefully. There's still runoff. Rock conditions are unstable." Rachel sat forward, blood rushing to her ears. "Did they find him?" The captain hesitated only for a breath. "Not yet." She gripped the sheets. "He's at the bottom of a vertical chamber, about 20 feet down. There's a logjam over the top, blocking the crevice. I climbed out through a split in the wall to reach the rim. It's southwest of the White Basin. I left cairns. I left markers. They have to see them." Captain Hayward nodded. "We've got aerial visuals. We're moving ground units in as close as the terrain allows." She wanted to scream. Instead, she whispered, "You don't have long." "We know." "Then go faster." The day stretched like sinew. Each hour passed slower than the one before. Rachel paced her room in slow loops, dragging her four-pole behind her. Her feet were bandaged, her joints swollen, but she couldn't sit still. When a nurse brought her lunch, she pushed the tray away. When a volunteer chaplain offered company, she shook her head. "I just want to know," she said. That was all. Just know. Afternoon. The wind outside the window picked up, sending flurries of dust across the parking lot. Rachel watched them swirl like ghosts. She hadn't looked at her phone once. She couldn't. The battery had died somewhere in the canyon, and she hadn't asked for a charger. It felt wrong. Like checking email at a funeral. She felt like a shadow. Like she had left herself back in the White Room, sitting in the cold beside Owen, waiting for the sky to crack open. At 5:46 p.m., she heard footsteps in the hallway. She knew the sound of urgency. She stood before they opened the door. Captain Hayward stepped in. And this time, he didn't hesitate. They found him. Rachel's knees went weak. She gripped the bed frame. He's alive. They're working on extraction. His vitals are weak but stable. We've got medics with him now. It's going to take time. He's pinned and partially hypothermic, but he's conscious. He asked for you. The words hit her like water in a desert. She collapsed into the chair behind her and covered her face with both hands. "Can I see him?" "Not yet," the captain said gently. "They'll airlift him as soon as he's free. We'll let you know which hospital as soon as we know." Rachel nodded into her palms. Alive. He was alive. They kept her overnight again. This time, she didn't argue. She fell asleep with her hand resting on her chest, over her heart, where Owen's voice had lived for days. She dreamed of red rock and sunlight, and the sound of his breath rising slow and steady beside hers. When she woke, she asked one thing. "Is he here?" Chapter 19. Sky above, stone below. The first thing Owen saw was sky. It wasn't much, just a fractured slice of blue between the cracked ceiling and logjam above him, but after so long in shadow, it felt like a miracle. He tried to lift his head to see more, but pain held him still. His vision pulsed in and out, his chest barely rising. He had been drifting somewhere deeper than sleep, a place where thoughts untethered and time ceased to exist. Then voices came. Distant at first, muffled shouts echoing down the sandstone walls. He thought he was dreaming until the words sharpened. "Hold steady. We've got a pulse." The light around him shifted. A blur of color dropped through the jagged opening in the ceiling, followed by another. Headlamps flashed across the walls. Ropes scraped against rock. Harnesses jangled. Owen blinked slowly, too weak to react. One of the figures knelt beside him. A woman's voice calm, commanding. "He's conscious." "Owen? Can you hear me?" He tried to speak. Nothing came out. But his eyes moved, just enough. "That's good," the medic said. "Don't try to talk. You're safe now. My name's Asha. We're here to get you out." Another medic slid in behind her, already opening a pack. BP's low. Breathing shallow. Pupils reactive. Asha's gloved hand touched Owen's wrist, then moved to his cheek. Hang in there. You're going to be okay. Owen tried to nod. It was barely a twitch, but they saw it. He wanted to ask about Rachel. He wanted to say her name. But the effort shattered inside him. The crevice was too narrow for a full team, so only 2 medics worked beside him while others stayed topside. A rescue tech was already rigging the winch system above, anchoring it to a boulder field beyond the basin. They spoke in clipped, low voices, practiced, fast, focused. Asha shined a light across Owen's leg. Compound fracture. Tibias partially exposed. Tourniquet? Not yet. Bleeding slow. We can stabilize and splint in place. She leaned closer. Owen, we're going to lift your leg and slide a board underneath. I won't lie, it's going to hurt like hell. But you need to stay with me, okay? His lips parted. A faint sound escaped, a breath, a crack of voice. Rachel. Asha stilled. She's safe, she said quietly. She got out. She's the one who brought us here. Tears welled in Owen's eyes. He wasn't sure why that broke him, but it did. Above, the tech called down, rigs ready. They had to widen the crevice entrance to lift him. Chisels chipped at the stone. A power drill echoed through the chamber. Dust drifted down. One wrong move and the walls could shift. Everyone knew it. Time slowed. Pain bloomed again, sharp and full as they lifted his leg. Owen screamed. He hadn't meant to. It tore out of him without thought. Asha didn't flinch. You're doing good, she said, fastening the splint. Stay with me, Owen. We're almost there. He bit back the next scream, fists clenched. When they finally got him onto the stretcher, he nearly passed out. The room tipped sideways. Light dimmed. Voices blurred. But then movement. The rope above tugged taut. We're lifting. It was the longest 20 feet of his life. The stretcher scraped against the sandstone edges as they pulled him up inch by inch. Even in the sling, he could feel every sway, every jerk. Blood roared in his ears. His fingers trembled. The wind touched his face, dry and cold. Then daylight. Blinding and unreal. They pulled him clear and laid him out gently on solid stone. The canyon surrounded him, vast, ancient, indifferent. And above it all, sky. Real sky. He stared up at it, dazed. Someone was holding his hand. Rachel had barely made it to the landing zone in time. They'd told her it would be hours, but she didn't care. She signed her own discharge papers. Against medical advice, against her nurse's pleading words, she wrapped her feet, pulled on hospital-issue shoes, and limped out the front doors of the hospital like a woman possessed. Search and rescue gave her a ride. The same captain, Hayward, watched her warily but didn't argue. The moment they reached the edge of the canyon basin, she was out of the truck, stumbling toward the mouth of the chute. She saw the stretcher before she saw him. Her voice cracked. Owen. Medics flanked him, and 4 bags dangled beside the rig. Owen was pale, bloodied, his eyes half shut from the drugs. But when he heard her voice, something shifted. His head turned. His lips moved. Rachel. She knelt beside the stretcher and took his hand. I'm here. He tried to squeeze her fingers. He was too weak. But the look in his eyes, raw and unguarded, said everything. I didn't think, he whispered. Didn't think you'd make it. You shouldn't have, she choked, brushing dust from his brow. But I did. You held me together. He blinked slow. You saved me. The chopper arrived minutes later. Wind roared across the basin, flattening sage and red dirt. The crew loaded Owen carefully, strapping him in, shielding his face from the rotor wash. Rachel stood just outside the range of the blades, her hair whipping across her face, eyes burning. A paramedic called down to her. You coming? She hesitated, then nodded. They helped her aboard. She didn't take her eyes off Owen. From the sky, the canyon looked almost innocent. A winding thread of color and stone. Sunlight poured across the rim. Storm damage was visible from the air, flood channels carved deep, debris lodged in cracks and splits, but from above, it held no hint of what had happened inside. Rachel gripped the seat rail as the helicopter surged forward. Owen lay beside her, eyes closed now, breathing steady through an oxygen mask. Monitors beeped. Lines ran from his arms to machines she didn't understand. The medic across from her gave a tight smile. "He's stable," he said. Rachel let out a breath that trembled in her throat. And then, for the first time since it began, she let herself cry. They took Owen to a trauma center 2 hours north. Rachel followed by ambulance once they landed. The hospital staff tried to keep her separate, but she refused to stay in the waiting room. She paced the whole way outside his room while surgeons operated. It took nearly 4 hours. They stabilized his leg, inserted a rod, cleaned and stitched his wounds, rehydrated him, checked for nerve damage, blood clots, internal bleeding. He came out sedated, but alive. When they let her in, she sat by his bedside without speaking. She held his hand again. This time, it was warm. That night, she didn't sleep. The hospital window overlooked a gravel lot, but she couldn't stop staring at it. She couldn't believe it was over. Not really. Not yet. Every shadow still made her flinch. Every echo brought back the sound of water. She checked Owen's monitors again. Steady. She touched his cheek again, and this time he stirred. His eyes cracked open. Groggy. Slow. "Hey," he rasped. Rachel smiled through her tears. "Hey, you made it out," he murmured. "So did you." He looked around. Then at her. Then down at their hands. "I thought I lost you." "You didn't." He swallowed. "Are we safe?" Rachel hesitated. Then nodded. "For now," she whispered. "We are." Chapter 20, the epilogue. They don't talk about the pain the same way others do. People ask what it was like, how it felt to be rescued. They want answers with arcs and closure. They want stories to make sense, to rise and fall and end cleanly. But survival doesn't work like that. It doesn't end with the helicopter. It doesn't end with the hospital bed or the long drive home. It lingers in the silence between words, in the memory of water rising, in the phantom weight of fear settling in your chest like a second heartbeat. Rachel still dreams of the canyon. Not every night, but often enough. Sometimes she's trapped. Sometimes she's climbing. Sometimes she's already too late. The light never quite reaches the bottom. For Owen, it's the stillness that haunts him most. The feeling of being pinned, not just beneath stone, but beneath the world of being forgotten by the sky, swallowed by silence. They both remember the waiting, how time stretched, how their minds frayed. They remember how the canyon changed shape in the dark, how the flood was not a wave, but a voice screaming through stone, how the sun vanished like it had never existed at all. They remember the moment they knew they might die, and the moment they decided not to. That decision, that refusal, is what binds them now. Not love, not luck, but choice, grit, the raw, burning need to see each other's face again, to not leave the other alone in that cold and narrowing place. Because the canyon didn't just try to kill them. It tried to make them alone. And they didn't let it. They endured hallucinations, dehydration, injury, despair. They endured the sound of water when there should be none. They endured each other's silences when the words ran out. They endured the turning of hours that didn't pass. They endured not knowing if anyone was coming. They endured the possibility that no one was. They endured. Not by force, but by faith. In something small and aching and stubborn, a hand on a shoulder, a voice whispering through the dark, a name remembered and spoken again. They made it out. But the canyon kept something from them and left something else behind. And that's what survival is. Not the triumph, not the escape, but the scar that proves you stayed. The canyon is still there. Still waiting. Still silent. Still carved into the earth like a secret. But Rachel and Owen no longer belong to it. They belong to each other instead. And whatever the canyon took, it could not take that. Not even in the White Room.
Thanks for listening. Stay cozy, and I'll see you in the next story.